So tonight, on this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Craig Young, who is probably the closest a guest I have ever had on the show, in that we could literally do this in the same room. Craig, welcome onto the show. I hope you're well.
Hello, yeah, I'm great. Yeah, thanks, Joel, for having me. Yeah, I had no idea how close you were until we caught up just before this. Literally could run out of my house, appear in your room, and come back. But yeah, there we go.
I knew you were in the same part of the world, but yeah, we literally we were chatting beforehand and realised we were less than probably 2 miles apart, which is just mad.
Amazing.
So yeah, I feel very rude doing this remotely now. I feel like I should have brought a microphone and sat in a coffee shop with you somewhere. But thank you, thank you very much for joining us. So Craig, obviously we met over social media, and we'll dig deep into your sort of like autoimmune disease and journey and everything else. But just for anyone that's not come across you or it's the first time they're sort of hearing you speak, because I believe it's probably the first time you shared your story on a place like this. Do you want to just give a sort of high level overview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course, mate. Yeah, so my name's Craig Young. I live here in Norfolk in the UK. I'm originally from Nottingham, hence why I don't sound like Joel. I've got a bit of a different accent. I've been in Norfolk for since 2010. I've had immune condition since 2011, and pre that led a very sort of active life, and then since having immune conditions, I've been quite a bit of an advocate, but more so sort of in the workplace space, not really publicly, to be honest. To say, as you mentioned, this is sort of my first for all, publicly, and on like my own socials and stuff like that. So yeah, that's me. I mean, yeah, I think probably with a lot of people who are listening to this, someone who's been just, for years trying to get to grips with what all this means, physically, mentally, trying to understand it all, different pathways, tips, advice, what's right, what's wrong, there's loads of stuff. So
that's minefield.
yeah, exactly. So that's me. And I think the one thing I'd say about me is that I massively try to before having this, I should say, I was really active sport wise. I used to play like football twice a week. I did sports science at uni. Like my dad was a pro footballer years ago. My mum was very active. My sister was very active. So basically came from a very sort of active background. And as I'm sure like yourself and many people can understand, like when something like this comes along and you're sort of that way inclined, it can just have such a massive impact on your life because, mentally things change, socially things massively change. And then, physically things change. So I think for me, since, once I got diagnosed, which was in 2011, I've been figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And as I think a lot of people can attest to, each day is just wildly different. So yeah, for me, I've just been getting to grips with what works, what makes me feel better, what can be too much and what can be too little. So yeah, a big passion of mine is sort of sport and exercise and how that can, I guess benefit me and people like me with similar conditions, Joel.
Yeah, no, I really look forward to digging into that because people that have been here before will know that I came from that sort of active background, and then it took me a lot of years. I think a lot of this that you see here today is a product of me grieving and getting over that, trying to find a different path. So yeah, I look forward to talking about that. And I must say as well, on behalf of the audience, everything, we feel very lucky that you chose here, I suppose, to be the first place you sort of done a live sharing of your story. So thank you, because I think compliments to our live audience. It probably says like that people feel sort of safe here, so it's a good job, everyone. And you speak brilliantly, Craig, and your audio is amazing, so thank you for a first time sort of sharer. That really doesn't come across, so thank you.
No, and I should say, Joel, I think the reason for that is I've listened to you for quite a while, just when I'm trying to get in the gym, do a bit of exercise, or on the bus on the way to work, I'll stick your podcasts on or watch it back on YouTube. And for me, just a big thanks, because I think, and again, I'm sure a lot of people will say the same, when you get diagnosed with something like this, you're just kind of on your own, right? And I think, you're given a few pamphlets in hospital or wherever it is, you're given these diseases on these pamphlets with these long words that you can't even say when you first see them, let alone understand what they are, let alone then find people who are sort of in the same boat. So Yeah, just big thanks to you, Joel, and everyone that's involved in, and supported you along the way, because this is a really great arena. I was on a look the other day just to how much content you've got, and the broad spectrum of immune conditions you've covered. I sort of think this is a really lovely space to come and listen to people who are suffering from similar conditions, and sort of give tips and advice, and just make it obvious that you're not on your own, really.
I really appreciate it. I'm trying to get better accepting comments. I've done this for a long while, feeling like a bit of a fraud, and I didn't know what to do. And I'd make some joke, and my head was already going to like making a joke about you going past my house on a bus listening to the podcast. How weird that could be. but no, like I say, it is. I really appreciate it because it keeps me going. Like we keep doing it, because there's only so many times. Like this week, I shared my story overseas, and it just reminded me, like, I've told this so many times now, and there comes a point where that loses impact. So I think the value of what we do here, to have somebody like yourself who's never done this before and share that, you just don't know who's going to listen. That first time, that person who's just been diagnosed, and maybe even somebody who's been diagnosed for years but not felt like they related to anyone, or saw themselves in somebody else's story, and that can make a huge difference to the help people get, and also the way they manage their condition. So thank you very much for your kind words, and for anyone watching this live or listening to this back will know how far I've come and been able to take that compliment, so I'm quite proud of myself. So I feel like deflecting away from me. I feel like I'm quite embarrassed in that we've talked a lot on social media, and you've been a massive support to me on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days and everything. But I'm a little bit embarrassed in that I don't understand fully the ins and outs of like your journey. So I understand you've got a couple of conditions. So do you want to maybe take us right back to the beginning and let us know how that sort of presented and what that looked like?
Yeah, of course, mate. Yeah, so I guess previously, just to say again, going back to me being active. So pre 2010, I lived in Nottingham. I was playing football on Saturdays and Sundays, 11-a-side, playing whole manner of sport, gym, running, just all the time. That was sort of my life, right? And then in 2010, I relocated to Norfolk because I met my lovely wife a couple of years before that, and relocated to this nice part of the world. And then when I moved here, I was doing a master's degree. So I made the decision basically not to carry on playing football for a bit, just to do my master's, but kept fit, with a view to then the following season getting involved in football. So in about the February-March time of 2011, I remember going out for a run, and then a couple of days later, my right hip had a load of pain in it. I'd never had that pain before. And I couldn't think that I'd strained anything, or when you play sport, it's quite obvious when you pull something or whatever. There was none of that. I went to the GP and said, look, I've done this. And they said, okay, we'll refer you for physio. But they said, by the time you get into the physio, that's probably going to have cleared itself
I've heard that so many times before.
Yeah. But then actually what happened, and this was literally within a matter of weeks, it was probably 4 weeks from that first, pain in the right hip. Pain had gone into left hip. I had pain in my chest, pain in my spine, and then pretty much most of my toes as well. And I basically was going back to the GP, quite scary, right? You got no idea what's going on. You're just in pain. Yeah, and considering as well, because I've done sports science at uni, and we've done modules where we covered different, conditions and, all that sort of stuff. I'll be honest, hold my hands up, never heard or was appreciative of anything like this. So obviously I didn't know what was going on really, other than I was in quite a lot of pain. And probably the most alarming thing was pain in the chest, which obviously now I know is costochondritis, right?
You pronounced that very well. I always struggle with that.
A lot of practice, mate. But, at the time I had no idea. So I'm going into the GP and saying, I've got this pain in my chest. I had one GP say to me, this is all in your head. There's nothing wrong with you. Which, when you've gone from, playing all that sport to then you've got all this stuff that's just happening to you and no one's really giving you, any indication as to what's going on, was, I was pretty upset, pretty emotional, because this was entirely, so frustrating. But in essence,
those comments stick with you as well. As someone that was a kid with arthritis, and I had to go the first year or two with people saying, "Watch him when he doesn't know you're looking, and see if he's still limping," and all this. You spend years sort of thinking, am I like dramatizing this? Am I a fraud? Am I struggling? All that sort of thing. So it sticks with you, doesn't it?
No, it's not very nice at all. But in essence, I had repeated GP appointments over It must have been about nine months, I think it was, Joel. Then in the end, what happened was a lovely young lady I'd never seen before, who sort of like a standing GP, because at the time I had all this pain, and also I had the tiniest spot of psoriasis on the back of my head. It basically felt what it reminded me of. And again, I didn't realize that was psoriasis. What it reminded me of was a teenager. You know, when you got spots, sometimes you used to get them like in your scalp or on your head. I just assumed, I'm getting a rogue spot in my sort of 20s. But anyway, she said, "Oh, I think that might be psoriasis." And then she asked the question, "Have you got any family history of psoriasis?" To which I said, "Oh, actually, I know I had grandparents on sort of both sides that had it." I'll be honest, that's kind of all I knew. I didn't know as to what level or anything. And she said, "Okay, well, I think it's this. I'm going to refer you to psoriatic arthritis. I'm going to refer you to the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital here." And then within, I think it was like something like 10 days. It was really quick.
Oh, wow.
Got an appointment. Yeah, and that's another thing I was going to touch on. Like back when I got diagnosed, the amount of time, the
Support
time
was there.
oh yeah, unbelievable. Versus, we won't get political, but versus now, it's completely different, right? So yeah, basically within about 10 days, 2 weeks, I then had that appointment with the rheumatologist. My wife came with me, which I'm glad she did, because I was a bit of a mess, to be honest, sort of coming out. But like walking in, literally within a matter of minutes, she was like, "Oh yeah, it's definitely this, no shadow of a doubt." And she said to me, "Right, we're now going to quickly start you on drugs," because she was very alarmed at actually how quick it had gone from standing start to where it got like literally within a month, right? And then after that month, it started going into other places, and where it was sort of getting worse. But so anyway, that was sort of my diagnosis journey. So it was a very sort of traumatic 9 months, really. And at the time as well, I was sort of new to Norfolk. I'd started a new job, so I was balancing a new job and this, and when you're not even sure what's going on yourself, it's quite hard to communicate with work. Like are you poorly? Are you sick? You're in pain? Like you obviously not experienced this before, so it's quite hard to sort of, even.
And employers struggle with these conditions at the best of time when we've got a diagnosis and a label. So trying to explain what was happening to you must have been a nightmare the first month or two.
Yeah, that was horrendous. But so that was basically sort of that, first 9 months, year, and linking back to the sort of active side of stuff. At that point, I was struggling to walk. So, quickly gone from 2 games of 11-a-side football a week to, within a year, really, to then not being able to walk. So
I think that's such an important point as well for anyone that's listening to this that doesn't understand the nature of the disease. Like you can't put your head in that space where you go from that position to struggling to walk, and then the way you have to adjust mentally to all of that is nobody prepares you for that, and there isn't really any support, is there? Unless you got something I didn't know about.
No, you're right. There's not. You're sort of given a few leaflets, and I say luckily my wife was there at the time, because I was quite an emotional sort of wreck, really, because the consultant said to me, "We're going to put you on some treatment," which was methotrexate tablets, was the lovely one I started on
as a kid.
And she sort of said to me, "If this doesn't work quickly, you could end up in a wheelchair within a matter of months." So again, trying to digest all that, looking back to a few months ago, I'm running around like a headless chicken, to now I could be in a wheelchair in a few months. Now, luckily for me, started on methotrexate, and that took probably a good 6 months to actually work. But then that did start to work.
Works. Yeah.
And then that's when I gradually, and this is for me, I think something I was going to talk about, was once I then got on that, and pain was still there, right? But I was better than, I was not at that 11-a-side football sort of each week, and I wasn't in, extreme pain, somewhere sort of in the middle that floated and was, tolerable. But the big thing for me was, and because I was advised not to exercise because of how bad it was then, right, you're almost starting again. What can I do? What can't I do? But I didn't jog for a long time, for example. Would just be doing like cross train, a very light exercise, like would go and swim, and I barely ever swam before that. My only experience of swimming really was going with mates down the leisure centre and going on the slides. Like, so,
Yeah.
you sort of kind of what, I think you touched on it, Joel, like you do grieve, I think. Like you have to quickly adjust to what is your new level of like what you can do. And it's not just, I mean, I'm talking about exercise, right? But there was a massive impact sort of on my social life because, I probably like anybody enjoyed nights out, and I used to love going out with friends, and we'd be out dancing all night. Quite quickly, when you got arthritis in your feet, that sort of thing doesn't happen.
When pain's horrendous.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're on methotrexate as well, like you can't drink.
Yep.
So socially, and at the time, I'm sort of mid 20s. Like friends are getting married, they're having stag do's and that sort of stuff. I mean, luckily, I had a great bunch of mates who, when we're on stag do's, like this always sticks in my mind, just to think how nice people can be. Where like people would buy shots, right, and they'd buy whatever, but then there'd be like a lemonade shot. Just what I mean?
Awesome. Yeah.
So like, I've been quite lucky that I've got very good friends, like lovely family, and very supportive. And then for me, work-wise, albeit, back when I got diagnosed, I didn't know what was going on, let alone, try and get something from them. I think once I got diagnosed, like my path at work has been amazing. I've had great, managers and stuff who have really tried to understand it and have given me a bit of a platform in work to sort of talk this, just to try and, educate people that, this is, there's plenty of stuff out there that impacts people, and it's not just joint pain, right? It's all everything else that goes with it.
I can relate. There was literally, I had about 18 questions going through that. So I'm not going to remember everything. No, just so relatable. Like the stag do, as somebody that had to go on their own stag do on methotrexate and be sober. And I told my brother that I wanted to go to Barcelona. I was like, let's do some culture since I can't drink. And they took me to Magaluf. And it's horrendous doing that sober. But like I say, if you've got people around you, it makes a big difference. And I think where I struggled, like, and I share this, I know it's not about me time, but I share this for anyone else listening. And it's like, I tried to hide it all. I come from that sporting background where I was worried about being judged and competitive background, that sort of thing. And then the trouble is when you then went on those do's, those events where people are throwing drink at you, or what you're not drinking for, and you get called all sorts of names, that typical sort of alpha male culture thing. You don't help yourself. So I think your example is really important because you clearly done the complete opposite to the way I tried to handle it, and then it all come crashing down, and so it's so nice to hear about work and friends and things like that being supportive. I really appreciate you sharing that.
No, yeah, and that's probably, I mean, I've probably always been quite an open person. Like my family always were, my parents always were, and I think as such I have been, like pre having this. And I think that's definitely made a massive difference. I think just from, you're right, that's definitely one thing I would advise if people are comfortable to, is being open, and just talking to friends and family and in the workplace, because I think from doing so I've met a number of people along the way who have got something similar or have got this, and I think there's a lot to be said for just talking to people who have got a similar thing, right? Just even if it's just to share tips and advice, or just that, to what you said, Joel, like that understanding of what you're going through sort of day to day, and how sometimes just to get to work is a massive challenge. Versus,
people don't see that side, do they?
No,
you see the hours that go in before.
No, like but when this has been bad for me, so I was on methotrexate for a few years. I started to fail, and I had a real battle trying to get off it and get onto other stuff, to try and basically prove to get on biologics. And the problem for me was I've never had any visible swelling, and that was one of the little tick boxes.
Tell me about it. I literally was crying on the ultrasound guy's bed, begging him to find something, because mine's the same. So nowadays it's really easy. My fingers go knobbly and my toes go fat. But when I was in my 20s, just didn't show blood tests or anything. And I've got the same sort of condition with a few tweaks and differences as you. And it's horrible that we're trying to jump through those gates to get access to these things that are going to make such a big difference.
And I mean, that was a horrendous time for me. That was probably a few years after. I had a good ride for a few years, beyond methotrexate, but when that happened, like, I really struggled to walk. Like in the morning, getting downstairs, like clinging on to the sort of banister to sort of, get down. And to even get to the bus stop, like I bought like a push scooter because like I wouldn't have been able to walk to the bus stop. I mean, that sounds crazy probably to
but it paints that picture that people need to see, that stark contrast, and then how quickly you have to adjust. And I don't know about you, but the thing I always find as well, which I think we need to improve on, and if your experience was different, please say, is that like nobody prepares you for when then the treatment stops working. So I went on methotrexate as a 14-year-old. And it was great. And for 10 years, apart from being a bit sick occasionally, it was fine. Methotrexate gets a bad rap, but when it works, it works. And then suddenly I get to my mid-20s and it just stops. And I was like, oh, right. So what are the options then? And so why are we not having those conversations? Right, Craig, we're going to put you on this. But if that doesn't work, this is what it'll look like. And this is what stage 2 will be. And that sort of thing is mad.
No, 100%, mate. No, exactly the same. There's none of that for me. It's sort of, just when it happens, and from what I've found is you have to sort of flag that yourself, right? And
you do.
You don't have appointments often enough to pick that up. So you're having to be really proactive to sort of push that. But there was times for me when it was an absolute nightmare trying to just get into the office. Coming back at lunchtime, my feet would probably then be sort of semi all right, and the issue I had was that went on for quite a while, which then has left sort of permanent damage in my feet now. So now I'm okay, like in terms of, inflammation. It's sort of kind of under control at the minute, and has been for a while. So I can, go running and stuff like that. But because of that permanent damage now, I can't go as far as I would have done. Years ago. It just prevented it. So that's really frustrating.
Yeah, that takes some getting over as well, doesn't it? That because the goalpost moved.
Yes,
good pun there, not intentional. But you know what I mean. They move, and the whole time I talk about this to my wife. It's like, you're trying to work out: is it because I'm unfit? Is it because I'm getting older? Or is it because this disease is kicking my ass and I need to try and it's so hard to work out what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, no, really hard. Like we, whenever we, like if we go out as a family or anything, we're on our feet for a long time. My feet then really hurt, and I'm sort of, checking in with my wife saying, are your feet hurting or not? And she goes, yeah, and I think, oh, that's all right. Like, it's because
you probably haven't gauged that yours is like really, really, we're not good at doing that, or we in our life with these diseases, we get that thing where I'll say, I'll try and say, oh, my back hurts, and someone will say, yeah, I get a bit of sciatica, and you're like, oh, for God's sake, and it's that kind of, everyone's got something they can relate it to, and I think that's what's really important when you're talking about that dramatic, the speed of it, and what happens when stuff doesn't work, and and how it affects just simple things like going on stag do's. And so I think they're really important things for us to share, because it's what separates it from a bit of a bad back or a bit of a sore knee.
Yeah. And it's just that ongoing, it's always there in your mind, right? Whether it be, you got to think, oh, I've got to have a blood test, or I've got to remember to take my meds, or like
pace yourself and all that. I've got this thing coming up in 4 days, so I better.
Yeah, exactly. So like like the amount of times I've either gone away with work or gone away with family, I think, oh, actually I might hold off taking my immunosuppressant just for a few days, just because I don't want to run the risk of picking up
going to that kid's party and you're thinking, I definitely ain't doing my biologic a day before that.
Exactly. Germ fest. Exactly.
So I think that's really important. I just wanted to come back to, you mentioned your wife a couple times of peer support, and like it's a bit of an issue where not everybody agrees, but like I'm one for saying, like, I think you create your own peer support. And I touched upon it earlier where like I wasn't very open, but then I complained I had no peer support. And why would I? Because I didn't let people in. You've clearly been a lot more open, and you talk about it at work and everything else. Therefore, you're getting that support. So I don't know. I just before we moved on to other things, I thought it might be important that we touch a bit more upon that sort of peer support and how important that role sort of played, and your partner. And also, I suppose it's also worth mentioning, it affects them as well. We probably don't in bigger support circles, we don't talk about caregivers and that enough. They have to adjust and grieve a little bit as well, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And it has you're right, it has a massive impact on them. You probably know as well as me the amount of times where you can't go out of bed in the morning, or you just need to lay down for a few hours. So we've got young kids, right? So what does that mean? It means your other half's got to lean into that. So yeah, I would say, yeah, but just being open for me has meant that almost in every circle of my life, I've got that support and people who do just ask like how you are. But also people who are, but I think it makes people inquisitive as well because people don't understand it. So they sort of ask, I've had people say to me, it's like, is there ever a day you're not in pain? So shows to sort of fully thinking about it. But yeah, for me, just being open has meant that I've had, all that support in sort of all avenues of life, Joel. And the other thing I would say, sort of from being open, is that, and it's quite a specific example, but one thing that I've found through being open is here locally, there's a group of people who just hire out a football pitch once a week, and it's for people with various conditions. So,
oh, right, okay.
So it's spot on. So there's people there who have had like cardiac things. There's people who, it's all ages, right? And
I'm already in the back of my mind thinking, why are you saying this? Because I'm now going to go downstairs and my wife is going to be literally waiting with the diary in front of us and book it in. You have no excuses anymore, John.
No. So, and it's, but I think from being open, it sort of opened those doors, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's lovely because, 1 week I could go down there and I feel not fine, but new fine, not old fine, if you know what I mean. So I can do a bit of running and run around and, love it. Versus other weeks I'm in pain. I think I'll still go, but actually it might be a bit more walking football for me. But
I love that.
at least I'm sort of still out. So yeah, I think, from being open, that's a specific example, but it sort of opens those doors. Now, the only thing I was going to touch on, Joel, was that like pre-COVID, I wasn't open like with my kids, I would say.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was because I think looking back to when I was younger, you see your sort of parents and family as sort of invincible, right? You never know sort of if there's anything. And, looking back, there probably was, but, they don't share that. So I hadn't really ever shared what was going on with sort of my kids until then COVID happened. And then, you're on this lovely shielding vulnerable list, which
system.
Yeah, and at the time it meant our kids could have gone to school as key worker because of my wife's work, but the sort of advice from the hospital was, for me, it was like, if you can not get them to go to school. And luckily for me, it works. I work at Aviva. They were amazing where they made it so that basically I could work just a couple of days a week and still get my salary, which meant the kids didn't have to go to school. But I guess what I had to do at that point was, and this probably affected me quite a lot. Obviously, one, it's lockdown, and you sort of that classification that you're vulnerable, which, to be honest, I don't think I'd ever really considered. But then opening up to your kids to try and explain this, and for me, it was a bit disheartening because you're not that invincible person that you sort of want to portray a little bit. And then since then, bless them, they sort of they try and understand it, I guess, as much as kids can. But so yeah, I'd say just be as open as you can if you're comfortable to, and it's opened a number of doors for me, and I've met numerous people who are in a similar boat.
Yeah, and I must admit, since I've done it, it's changed everything. I say I wouldn't be here doing this. I've gone total sea change, like the other way with all of this. And I think a lot of that is like years of just not having anyone to talk to, and now we're suddenly doing, like, even like we started this episode with you saying how this is your first time doing this, and I'm learning from you. And I think that's the really important thing about us sharing this stuff, is that you can take the bits you need. I know I need to get out and be more sociable and move more, and you're sort of sharing us how you can do that. Because I don't know about you, the bit I really struggled, being a sporty person, I wasn't football, I come from different backgrounds, but it's trying to find enjoyment with a lower bar. Did you find that? Like, if I couldn't do it the way I was doing it, if I couldn't play first team rugby, or I couldn't do this, then I didn't want to know. And I still struggled with that a little bit.
100%. 100%. And I think for me, I totally avoided all sport, but like watching it as well. I used to massively watch it. Like, I'd go play sport, and then I'd be in the pub with friends watching it, all that sort of stuff. And then when this happened, I completely I can't, any sort of link to it would just, further remind me. So I had to sort of, almost lose myself in other stuff. And I think my sort of escapism a bit was then my family, having a young family, having days out and that sort of thing. So I sort of naturally I mean, that shift might have happened anyway, right? But I sort of shifted into that. But oh yeah, massively. That took a lot of getting used to for me, because I was always really fit. I remember at school, like winning the like the bleep test, and then at college and uni, and then hang on a minute, I now I can't get down the stairs, let alone even entertain doing that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a real big mental shift. And again, I think being open and trying to talk that through with people who understand, and what I've sort of done, sort of created around me, is I've got people who are don't have this, but they're like active runners, and there's that football group, and the people who go running will say to me, "Oh, do you want to?" They always ask me, "Do you want to come out?" And I'll go at a slower pace, so I won't go very far. So again, being open has sort of created that. But yeah, for me, so frustrating to just know that you can't get back to sort of where you were, and you sort of grieve for it, right?
I feel like I had a midlife crisis in my 20s. It's like, that's how I describe it. It's literally what it felt like, and then you sort of have to get over that. And now I'm turning 40 this year, and I know I'm getting round 2, but I'm feeling more sort of prepared for it. I shouldn't go out like buying a sports car or anything this time around, I don't think. But no, it's really important. So thank you for sharing that. And I understand, have you got AS as well?
Ankylosing spondylitis. Yeah.
We've talked about it before on the show, but for anyone that's sort of new to it, do you want to maybe explain that and then how that came about?
So again, in that diagnosis period, that was that sort of pain in the back, and for me, it was all one and the same. It wasn't really until I sort of got diagnosed that were like, well, you've got that and this. But I mean, to me, in terms of how it felt, it didn't feel any different to sort of where it is. I guess it's just that sort of specific part. But so for me, I got diagnosed with that. That was actually one of the things that went with methotrexate quite well, and didn't rear its head until probably maybe a few years ago. But like now, what that means for me is I've got a few sort of sore spots that I'm nowhere near as flexible as I sort of was before. And when I am playing that football, I've got to be massively conscious of sort of that. I don't want to do any serious damage. But touch wood, luckily for me, that has not been overly bad, Joel. It's sort of been sort of everywhere else. But yeah, when that has been bad though, I've had times when that has flared for one reason or another, and that has caused absolutely horrendous, like leg pain, through like that sort of sciatica type pain.
Stuff going on in your back.
And then alarm bells from the consultant, asking all those questions about your bowel and your bladder. I was, well, why are you asking that? That thought process hadn't even entered my mind that, that could be, quite dangerous and impact, obviously your spine can impact other things. But yeah, touch wood, for me, that hasn't been overly bad. But I have found though, through, gentle exercises and stretching, I do a lot of sort of light things in the gym, like resistance stuff, to sort of help stretch my back and help my core, and that's sort of definitely helped. But and one thing, swimming definitely helps, I found. But the only thing is, caveat, when it's been bad sort of higher up, swimming's a no-go.
You can't swim. No,
trying to like
you're
get
crippled.
Your head out.
And the reason I can relate to this, by the way, just for anyone who's listening or not aware, is like there's a lot of crossover between psoriatic arthritis and AS. So much so that I was actually diagnosed with AS when I was 14, only to be told in my mid-20s that it was psoriatic arthritis because there was no fusing and stuff like that. But that neck pain is the worst. I would take any other pain my condition throws at me than that neck pain. And yes, swimming. I struggle with cycling as well. I like cycling, but I can't go out in the wind because anything, I had to sell my motorbike for the same reason, because anything that put pressure on my head, if that triggers that neck pain, well, my wife would tell you I am the worst person to be around.
Yeah, it is not nice. That was my shortest ever swim visit. I think anyone watching would have thought, what's he doing? Just sort of walked in poolside, get in, do a length, got out, and then back out. Sort of one length and out.
And did you struggle, like, because you mentioned earlier about the whole, like, they said, stop doing this, take it easy. Like, I really struggled with the mixed messages, because especially when they thought I had AS, because I very much went from, you got to rest, you got a bed rest, you're in a wheelchair, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you got to keep move or lose, all that sort of stuff. Trying to find a balance is hard work, isn't it?
It's really hard. And you're right, it's definitely mixed messages. Like I had that advice around, don't do things. So I had that in my mind and was very like, oh, I'm going to really hurt myself if I do anything.
Yeah.
And was kind of had that mentality for a while, and I kept seeing the same person. And then when I then saw someone who stood in for them, because for whatever reason they weren't there, their mentality was, oh, take an anti-inflammatory, go out and do some exercise. And I was thinking, well, what? This isn't what I'd sort of been told up to this point. And I think, do you know what? That was the first time I realized that this isn't black and white. There's so much opinion around this stuff, and now everyone's different. And I think that at that point, and that was probably a couple of years in, that sort of spurred me on to then do a hell of a lot more research and reading and asking people and asking questions, versus I think, you get diagnosed with something, you're like, okay, well, you tell me what to do because you're the sort of pro. I've got no idea. And I think over time I've sort of, come out of that way of thinking. But yeah, you're right. It's completely mixed messages. And I think as time's gone on, I think the messages I've been more towards exercising. It seems, I don't know if that's just me, but definitely seems to have been a bit of a natural shift. And I definitely see more mention around mental health now versus at the start of this diagnosis. There was
taking a lot of effort. It's taken a lot of effort, and I must admit, since I started advocating, I've got a better appreciation of it. I used to get really angry about why you're not asking me how I feel, or how it's affected my job. But now, because I get to go to conferences or work alongside doctors, we've had doctors on this show. I appreciate now that they're not trained to deal with the answer. They're not equipped. They get 7 minutes or whatever it is with us. And if I go in there and say I'm suicidal, and that has happened before, they don't know what to do with that information. There's no joined up between departments. There's no referrals. I saw my rheumatologist last year and they could not refer me to dermatology. It's mad, absolutely mad. And we sit in the middle with things like psoriatic arthritis across multiple disciplines. So we're getting there, but it's really important that you mention it. And we try to get that mentioned on the show every single week until we see a bit of a sea change. So thank you for bringing that up. No, and I think also as well, just whilst I'm on my advocacy high horse, and sorry, excuse me while I do this, is like we're going through this change as well in the UK at the minute with patient-initiated follow-up, or PIFU, where they're basically cancelling all routine appointments and people are now expected to know when to ring up and ask for an appointment. Well, like you just mentioned there, the mixed messages, the whole work and should I be doing this, should I be doing that, how we're supposed to switch from we just sit and nod and do what the doctor tells us. You're expected to know when to ring up and ask. It's just that it keeps me up at night more than anything my son is going through at school or whatever. I know probably bad parent and image there, but you know what I mean? It generally keeps me up. So thank you for mentioning that, because I think it highlights where the pitfalls could be with that, with the changes that are going through. Sorry, very leading question and comment there, but
no, you're fine.
So, like, for anyone that's sort of listening to this and sort of inspired, I know I'm certainly motivated. I could already see my partner is in the comments, eyeballing some of the activity stuff you're talking about. And for anyone listening to this, if they're newly diagnosed, or maybe they've been diagnosed a long while and given up, like I certainly went to that place where I thought, well, I can't do anything I enjoy because I can't do it to the level I used to be able to do it at. You got any sort of words for people about, finding things they can do on a level that they can do them, sort of thing?
Yeah. So again, it's quite a journey you have to go on mentally, I would say, that we've touched on. But I think for me, it was lowering that bar and setting sort of new expectations. And, with this condition, it's like when it's a bad day, it's a bloody bad day, right? But for me, it's then, right, okay, well, on them bad days, what is it that I can sort of view as success? And that might just be a little walk, locally around the estate, and only a few minutes sort of thing. So that's then that success for that day versus, and I think what I've tried to do is that when I then am feeling well, or that sort of, again, it's not the old well, but it's sort of that new well that we've all sort of come accustomed to, right? Is then seizing that moment and just getting out there and doing something. And for me, that might be, again, I used to run quite far. I can't do that anymore. So it's more sort of a slower pace jog just to get out there for half an hour. For me, if I can get that done, that's sort of my bar. And then again, if I'm sort of in between, so maybe not having a terrible day, but not at the level I can do that might be then for me where I've still got a gym membership at our local gym. So I'll go on sort of the resistance machines, and it's all like sort of light stuff. you know, the difference I feel, and again, and I wish I'd have known this or even thought of this when I was in that early journey. I feel massively better from doing it. Like that, I could have pain going into that, but then coming out of it, it is better just from moving things. And the other thing, this is a little bit of a nugget that I've found since I lived in Norfolk. That whenever we go to the coast, I always take some trunks and a towel, because I guarantee you, swimming in that cold water for like 20 minutes, I feel like a new man when I come out. So,
it's funny, isn't it? Because you sort of associate heat and like I will often reach the heat and things, but like sometimes that cold has its place, and so I have lots and lots of hot baths, but my skin hates it. If I go and jump in the cold sea, my skin really benefits from it.
No, so I think it's just adjusting and just setting yourself sort of simple, like, you know, smaller goals. Don't, like, for me, you know, because I'd always kind of been at a level, which you kind of got to, you know, almost forget that and just start from, you know, just simple things like, you know, a little walk, or then can that turn into a jog if you're comfortable, and that sort of thing, and just setting sort of simple, you know, simple goals. And the one thing I would say is, for anyone who's on like the likes of Strava and stuff, I've found at times that can sometimes like impact you sort of mentally as well, because you can see people who are out there smashing it, you know, each week, but you're like, oh God, what I'd give to just run a quarter of that or something like that. So all I'd say is, and if you're going through sort of a bad time, I tend to stray off that sort of stuff, just because, you know, it just doesn't help. So for me, I'd just say set, you know, simple goals, small goals, and just try and gradually, you know, work your way up. But then the only thing I would say is that I found is that, you know, then you get a really bad flare and you kind of have to start again. So you're kind of on this sort of, in terms of fitness and trying to do activity, you're constantly on this like wave. So that's something that I've gotten used to. Is almost the way I see it, was like, again, going back to football, but you sort of play a season, you get fitter, and then you drop off, and then you have, you know, your pre-season or whatever, and you get fit again. It's like that, but it's in a really small sort of space. And you know, you have no idea when that might stop and start, right? Because based on flares and stuff. So that's probably what I'd say, Joel.
No, it's really good advice. And we actually just created our own Strava group for our community. So for anyone who's watching this live, I'll pop the link on there where people can find it. For that same reason, I need a bit of a kick. And if I see somebody doing it and they're having a bad day and they're still moving, then I will move. So we literally just got that started up. And I think as well, the bit you said there about it's like building up, it's like for walking, you know, for a long while didn't accept just being able to walk as activity, and because I used to play rugby and cycle and all this sort of stuff, I couldn't see the value in just walking. And I had a really good biologics nurse once that sort of explained to me, but you can walk, or you can really walk, and they knew how to press my sort of competitive buttons. And now I do 6 miles a day like it's nothing. But if you'd have said to me 2 years ago you'll be able to walk 6 miles a day, I'd have bitten your hand off, and I also wouldn't have believed you. So it's kind of like reframing stuff, isn't it? And once you do that, I think it gets a lot more palatable, and you start having a bit of enjoyment out of it. So really good points, Craig. Really appreciate you sharing those. I think that's pretty much our time. Like, so I'm always conscious of people on Sundays. I feel like we could have just talked for like another hour. So thank you so much. You definitely don't come across as this is your first time doing this sort of thing, and I'm sure you must be an amazing asset with what you share at work. Please do come back again. And as you're down the road, I feel like we should probably do something in person as well. At least grab a drink at the very least, and moan about living with these things to feel better about ourselves. Before you go, is there anywhere you want to share or tell people where they could find you if they want to get in touch on social media or anything? Yeah,
so on Twitter it's CY27. That's probably the best place where I sort of, you know, talk about these things. Probably just Twitter me.
Okay, brilliant. And normally somebody will find that and share it in chat for anyone that's watching live or watching the video back. For anyone that's listening to this on the podcast, you'll find the link to where you can find Craig in the show description. Craig, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad we finally got around to doing this. It feels like we've sort of been in touch forever on social media, but not realising we're only 2 miles apart. So thank you so much for joining me quite ridiculously remotely, and maybe next time we'll do it in person. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks, Joel. Lovely to meet you, mate, and thanks for everything that you do.
Brilliant. No, thank you. And like I say, these conversations really do matter, and they will reach people and help people. And the stuff you've shared is definitely going to make a difference. And I know you've been very popular watching the live chat tonight. So thank you ever so much for your time, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Joel. See you.
Bye bye.